At first glance, Canada looks like a place Australians expect to understand instantly. The cities feel orderly, the language familiar, the humor understated. There is no dramatic border moment, no obvious cultural rupture. Yet for many Australians, the difference begins to surface almost immediately, not as shock, but as a quiet disorientation. The streets feel calmer, but not in the relaxed, sun-warmed way of coastal Australia. The calm here is cooler, more contained, shaped by restraint rather than ease. Conversations sound softer. Smiles appear quickly, but they linger at a careful distance. Everything works, yet nothing invites casual looseness. Australians often arrive assuming Canada will feel like a colder cousin, similar values, similar lifestyles, just layered in winter clothing. Instead, they encounter a society that moves with deliberation rather than flow. In public spaces, people give each other wide emotional margins. Eye contact is brief. Voices stay measured. Even friendliness arrives wrapped in politeness, as if warmth must always pass through a filter of consideration before being shared. For Australians accustomed to informal banter, teasing familiarity, and an easy collapse of social distance, this can feel strangely formal, even when no one is being unfriendly. The first impressions often crystallize in small moments. A casual joke that lands flat. A relaxed greeting met with courteous reserve. A sense that humor here is quieter, less irreverent, less willing to push boundaries. Australians are used to a culture where understatement and sarcasm function as social glue, where friendliness is often expressed through gentle mockery. In Canada, social harmony tends to take precedence. Words are chosen carefully. Edges are softened. Conflict, even playful, is subtly avoided. The result is an atmosphere that feels safe and considerate, but also emotionally contained. Public life reinforces this impression. In Australian cities, energy often spills outward, cafes hum with noise, strangers chat easily, laughter travels. In Canada, even busy places feel hushed by comparison. People line up patiently, speak softly, and rarely intrude on one another's space. There is an unspoken agreement to keep personal worlds intact. For Australians, who often read openness and volume as signs of ease, this restraint can feel like distance, even though it is rooted in respect. Climate quietly deepens this difference. The cold in Canada is not just environmental, it shapes behavior. Movement becomes purposeful. Interactions become efficient. Winter imposes structure on daily life, and with it comes a mindset of preparation and control. Australians, raised in climates that encourage spontaneity and outdoor living, often sense that life here is organized around endurance rather than enjoyment. Social plans feel scheduled rather than improvised. Even leisure carries a sense of intention, as if relaxation must be earned and carefully managed. At this early stage, many Australians struggle to name what feels off. Nothing is wrong. People are kind. Systems function smoothly. Yet beneath the surface, there is a growing awareness that Canadian politeness operates differently from Australian ease. One prioritizes emotional safety and predictability. The other leans toward informality and shared humor. And it is within this subtle gap, between restraint and relaxation, that the deeper culture shock begins to form. As time passes, the differences become less about first impressions and more about underlying values. Australians begin to notice how deeply Canadians prioritize emotional equilibrium. Interactions are guided by an almost instinctive desire to avoid friction. Apologies appear frequently, not as admissions of fault, but as tools for smoothing the emotional landscape. Disagreement is softened, phrased indirectly, or quietly sidestepped. For Australians, whose culture often treats bluntness and good-natured confrontation as signs of honesty, this can feel confusing. The absence of directness is not passive, but protective, an effort to preserve collective comfort. This mindset reveals itself most clearly in everyday social behavior. In Australia, friendliness often emerges through familiarity, nicknames, teasing, casual intrusion into personal space. In Canada, friendliness maintains boundaries. People are helpful, but rarely intrusive. Conversations remain polite rather than personal. Neighbors may shovel a driveway without a word, yet hesitate to invite someone inside. For Australians, used to social bonds forming quickly and informally, this distance can feel like emotional glass, transparent, courteous, but difficult to pass through. Work culture reinforces the contrast. Canadians value balance and stability, but they approach it differently than Australians. Where Australian work culture often emphasizes clear separation between work and personal life, with humor, informality, and a collective sense that life comes first, Canada's version is quieter and more structured. Professional environments remain polite and measured. Ambition is present, but understated. Achievement is rarely celebrated openly, and self-promotion is carefully muted. Australians, accustomed to relaxed workplaces with casual language and visible camaraderie, may interpret this restraint as stiffness, even when colleagues are supportive. Money, too, carries a different emotional weight. Canadians tend to treat financial matters with discretion and modesty. Conversations about income, success, or lifestyle upgrades are subdued. Prosperity is not denied, but it is rarely displayed. Australians, whose culture balances egalitarian values with open conversation and humor about money, often sense a subtle tension here. In Canada, financial stability is associated with responsibility and privacy rather than freedom or enjoyment. The tone remains careful, as if excess visibility could disturb social balance. Social trust exists in both cultures, but it expresses itself differently. Australians often demonstrate trust through openness, leaving doors unlocked, striking up conversations, assuming goodwill. Canadians demonstrate trust through systems and norms. There is faith in rules, institutions, and collective cooperation. People follow procedures not out of fear, but out of shared expectation. For Australians, this reliance on structure can feel constraining, even while it produces a sense of safety and predictability. Over time, many Australians experience a subtle emotional shift. The constant politeness begins to feel heavy, as if every interaction requires calibration. Humor is toned down. Spontaneity is reduced. There is a sense of always being slightly inside voice, even in moments that would invite loudness back home. Yet alongside this discomfort, another feeling emerges: calm. Life feels orderly. Conflict is rare. Daily interactions are smooth, almost frictionless. This duality creates an internal tension. Canada offers peace, but at the cost of emotional looseness. Australians begin to realize that the culture shock is not about cold weather or formal manners, but about how differently comfort is defined. In Australia, comfort often comes from shared laughter and emotional openness. In Canada, comfort comes from predictability, courtesy, and mutual restraint. And as this realization settles in, the question quietly forms: not whether one way is better, but what is lost, and what is gained, in the space between them. With longer exposure, the cultural contrast reshapes how Australians interpret everyday life. Many begin to notice how Canadian society places emotional safety above expressive freedom. Public behavior is guided by an unspoken agreement to keep interactions smooth, predictable, and non-disruptive. This creates an environment where people rarely feel threatened, embarrassed, or publicly challenged. For Australians, raised in a culture that often uses humor, irreverence, and casual confrontation to build connection, this safety can feel simultaneously comforting and limiting. Gradually, Australians learn that silence in Canada is not emptiness, but intention. Pauses are respected. Personal space is protected. Social restraint is considered maturity rather than distance. Yet even as this logic becomes clear, adaptation is not always effortless. Many Australians describe a lingering sense of emotional compression, a feeling that parts of their natural expressiveness must be gently folded away. Laughter grows quieter. Sarcasm becomes selective. Familiar habits are softened to avoid misunderstanding. At the same time, Canada begins to offer something unexpected in return. The absence of constant social friction creates room for calm. Daily life carries less emotional volatility. Disagreements rarely escalate. Strangers are consistently courteous. Over time, this steadiness can feel grounding. Australians who stay long enough often notice a shift in their own behavior, voices lowering, patience increasing, reactions slowing. The culture does not demand change, but it subtly rewards composure. This transformation reveals the deeper nature of the culture shock. It is not about weather, accents, or visible customs. It is about how societies manage emotional energy. Australia tends to release it outward, through humor, openness, and informality. Canada contains it, through politeness, structure, and restraint. One prioritizes expressive connection. The other prioritizes collective comfort. For some Australians, this difference eventually feels too constricting. They miss the ease of speaking freely, the bonding power of shared jokes, the emotional warmth that comes from unfiltered interaction. For others, Canada's quiet order becomes deeply appealing. The predictability brings relief. The courtesy feels humane. Life feels less sharp, less demanding. In the end, the experience leaves a lasting imprint. Australians come to understand that comfort is not universal, it is culturally designed. What feels warm in one place may feel distant in another. What feels relaxed in one culture may feel careless in another. Canada does not reject Australian openness, it simply operates on a different emotional frequency. And when Australians eventually reflect on their time there, the memory is rarely dramatic. It is subtle. A slower pace. Softer voices. A society gently organized around consideration. Canada does not announce its differences loudly. It reveals them quietly, over time, in the way people speak, wait, apologize, and make space for one another. And in that quiet revelation, many Australians gain a deeper understanding, not just of Canada, but of how culture shapes what it means to feel at ease.